Friday, February 21st, 2020. Just before sunrise, Manchester Airport was waking up. Families rushed through terminal doors. Men in high-visibility jackets waved travelers into valet bays. Keys exchanged hands. Everything appeared ordinary. But as planes lifted from the runway that morning, something else was moving too. Within minutes, vehicles entrusted to professional parking services were already being redirected through side roads, heading toward the industrial outskirts of Greater Manchester. Weeks would pass before investigators realized this wasn't a parking mix-up. It was the beginning of a network that would reach far beyond Manchester, stretching to ports in Essex and Liverpool, to freight containers bound for Turkey and the United Arab Emirates, and into a criminal infrastructure that had once been dismantled but had quietly, methodically come back to life. Years later, on a cold morning in October 2024, the quiet streets of Oldham stirred again. In the corner of an old mill, cars sat half dismantled under the glare of strip lights. It looked like any other garage until you noticed the shells lined against the wall waiting their turn. The faces were different, but the rhythm was the same. They called themselves 5-0, and by the time most of the city woke up, their operation was already underway. This is the story of the Manchester Airport valet scam, how a dismantled empire quietly came back to life with more precision and power, and how investigators used technology, patience, and forensic discipline to uncover one of the region's most sophisticated vehicle theft networks in a decade. Before we go deeper, subscribe if you love true crime documentaries, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. The first reports came in quietly. A handful of travelers returning from holidays found their cars missing. At first, airport staff believed it was an internal mix-up, perhaps a misplaced key or a clerical error in the parking lot management system, but within days, the pattern became impossible to ignore. Dozens of vehicles, all left with off-site valet companies, had vanished without a trace. The operation was simple, and that simplicity was its strength. Fake valet firms appeared online, offering cheaper parking than official airport services. Their websites were convincing, filled with logos, confirmation emails, and testimonials copied from legitimate companies. At the terminal, their employees looked the part too. High-visibility jackets, branded lanyards, even printed paperwork bearing the airport's name. They met customers at drop-off zones, took the keys, and drove the vehicles away in full view of closed-circuit television cameras. Nothing about it looked suspicious. In an environment where thousands of cars moved through valet services every week, these transactions blended seamlessly into the routine. What victims didn't know was that the cars were never parked off-site. Within minutes, they were being redirected through side roads toward Greater Manchester's industrial outskirts, places like Oldham, Chadderton, and Radcliffe. These areas, dotted with shuttered mills and unit yards, would later become central to one of the region's largest car theft investigations. The stolen vehicles weren't random either. Investigators later found clear targeting. High-end models easy to resell or strip for parts. Range Rovers, BMWs, Audis, Porsches, Mercedes-Benz. Many were stolen to order, based on specific colors or trim levels requested by buyers overseas. Once off the airport grounds, each car was taken to a temporary holding unit. And what happened there reveals the industrial scale of the operation. By the time owners landed back in the United Kingdom and called to check on their vehicles, the cars were already dismantled or loaded for transport. Police noted how professional the execution was. No alarms triggered, no traces left behind. It wasn't joyriding or opportunistic theft. It was logistics. The first official link between the missing airport vehicles and Manchester's organized crime groups would only emerge months later. By then, the network was already expanding, and what began as a parking service had turned into a multi-million-pound export line. The question investigators faced was simple but urgent. Who was running it, and how deep did it go? The investigation into Manchester's missing airport cars soon revealed a far more intricate network than anyone expected. When police traced the first recovered vehicle back to an industrial unit in Oldham, they uncovered the name that would later anchor the entire operation: Asif Hussain. On paper, Hussain appeared to be a businessman. His company, German Automotive 365 Limited, was registered to a modest address and listed as a car parts supplier. During the pandemic, it had even received a government bounce-back loan, a detail that would later raise questions about how public funds were being used. To detectives, the paperwork was little more than camouflage. The company linked directly to a stream of stolen vehicles that were being dismantled and prepared for export. Working alongside him was Haider Ali, who managed day-to-day operations from the garages and mill units the group occupied. His name appeared on tenancy agreements for several of the sites, among them a space at Stockfield Mill in Chadderton. There, investigators later found stripped Land Rovers, cloned parts and fragments of chassis numbers ground away to hide their origin. The wider team ran like a production line. Sajid Jung Haria was connected to vehicle pickups, often seen moving freshly stolen cars between units. Taub Hassan led logistics within Greater Manchester, sourcing premises, moving equipment, and ensuring each site stayed one step ahead of police interest. Ibrahim Shafi, meanwhile, kept the money moving. His role would prove crucial in understanding how the network sustained itself financially. When detectives began combing through phones seized from the group, the pattern became clear. Messages referenced vehicles as shopping lists, specific models, colors, and years requested by buyers. Calls placed the same devices near theft scenes across Manchester and Cheshire, and when customs data was reviewed, it revealed a fake freight business, KG Logistics, used to book containers under cloned company identities. By the time investigators mapped it all together, the scale was undeniable. What began with a handful of stolen airport cars had grown into a network of mills, storage units, and exporters. The question was no longer whether this was organized crime. It was how far the network reached and whether it could be dismantled before it evolved further. The first real break in the case came not from a tip-off or confession, but from technology quietly watching the roads. Greater Manchester Police's automatic number plate recognition system began flagging vehicles that had been reported missing from the airport's valet services. Within days, several of those same registration numbers appeared again, this time captured on cameras along routes leading to Chadderton and Radcliffe. Both areas were already familiar to investigators. They had long been associated with small-scale chop shops, garages that stripped down stolen cars before police could trace them. The locations were deliberately chosen: dense clusters of units, narrow access roads, and plenty of noise from nearby workshops to mask the sound of tools cutting through metal. Surveillance teams were deployed. Detectives soon noticed a pattern. By day, the shutters stayed down, sometimes for weeks, but late at night, activity surged. Vehicles arrived after dark, driven by different people each time. Within hours, they were stripped to their frames. Engines, gearboxes, electronic control units, seats, dashboards, even wiring looms were removed with surgical precision. The pace was remarkable. A high-end SUV could be reduced to a bare shell in under 3 hours. What remained was either crushed on site or transported to scrap dealers who asked no questions. The valuable parts were sorted, wrapped in plastic, and prepared for shipment. Investigators later learned that much of this work was done by men with formal training in automotive mechanics, some of whom had previously worked in legitimate garages before transitioning into the black market. The digital trail was just as revealing. Phone records showed repeated contact between individuals at the dismantling sites and freight agents operating out of Liverpool and Felixstowe. These agents arranged for containers to be booked under false company names, often using cloned paperwork from legitimate exporters. The parts were declared as used automotive components, a description vague enough to pass through customs checks without triggering immediate suspicion. But when customs agencies in Turkey and the United Arab Emirates began running serial number checks on incoming shipments, the trail led back to stolen UK vehicles. The network was structured in layers, each insulated from the others to minimize risk. Drivers who collected cars from the airport had no contact with the dismantling teams. Those teams didn't communicate directly with the exporters, and the exporters had no knowledge of where the parts originated. At least, that's what they claimed. Financial investigators began tracing money flowing from the Manchester garages to repeat buyers overseas. Payments were disguised through legitimate-sounding accounts, auto parts, performance upgrades, logistics fees. But the volume and frequency didn't match normal business patterns. Hundreds of thousands of pounds were moving through accounts that, on paper, should have been handling far smaller transactions. The investigation was methodical, but it was also slow. Each piece of evidence had to be cross-referenced with phone data, customs records, and surveillance footage. And as the police built their case, the network continued operating. The question wasn't just whether they could prove the conspiracy, it was whether they could prove it before another wave of stolen vehicles disappeared overseas. Then came the moment that changed everything. A high-value Range Rover, reported stolen from Manchester Airport, was tracked using a discreet GPS beacon that had been installed by its insurer. Within hours, the signal led directly to a unit in Oldham. Police moved quickly. When they entered the premises, they found the vehicle already partially dismantled. Nearby were tools, parts from other cars, and paperwork linking the site to Asif Hussein's company. It was the confirmation they needed. The network wasn't just stealing cars, it was processing them with industrial efficiency, and it was happening under the cover of registered businesses with legitimate-looking documentation. The next phase of the investigation would require even more patience, more surveillance, and a coordinated effort across multiple agencies. Because what police were beginning to realize was that this wasn't an isolated operation. It was part of a much larger criminal ecosystem, one that had been quietly rebuilding itself for years. By early 2021, Greater Manchester Police had enough evidence to move forward. Warrants were issued. On a coordinated morning in March, officers executed simultaneous raids across 5 locations in Oldham, Chadderton and Radcliffe. What they found exceeded expectations. Rows of luxury vehicles in various stages of dismantling. Electronic equipment used to reprogram key fobs and bypass immobilizers. Shipping documents listing destinations in Turkey, the UAE and West Africa. And computer records showing requests for specific vehicle types, complete with color codes and trim specifications. The evidence was overwhelming. Asif Hussein, Hadia Ali, Sajid Jangharia, Taub Hassan, and Ibrahim Shafi were all arrested and charged with conspiracy to steal, handle, and export stolen goods. The trial began months later at Manchester Crown Court. Prosecutors laid out the full scope of the operation. Over 90 vehicles had been processed through the network. The total value exceeded £2 million, and the impact went far beyond financial loss. Victims described the emotional toll of returning from holidays to find their cars gone, the frustration of dealing with insurance companies, the violation of knowing their property had been stolen while they were away. The defense argued that some of the men were simply employees, unaware of the criminal nature of the business. But phone records told a different story. Messages clearly referenced stolen vehicles, calls were placed near theft scenes, and financial transactions showed profits being split among the group. When the verdict came, all 5 men were found guilty. Asif Hussein received the longest sentence, 7 years imprisonment, reflecting his role as the network's organizer. Hadia Ali was sentenced to 5 years. Sajid Jangharia received 4 years. Taub Hassan was given 3 years. And Ibrahim Shafi, whose financial coordination proved essential to the operation, was sentenced to 4 years. The judge described the network as highly professional and organized, one that exploited legitimate business structures to mask systematic criminality. The conviction sent a clear message, but as investigators would later discover, dismantling one network didn't end the problem. It simply created space for another to emerge. Years later, on a cold morning in October 2024, the quiet streets of Oldham stirred again. In the corner of an old mill, cars sat half dismantled under the glare of strip lights. It looked like any other garage until you saw the shells lined against the wall waiting their turn. The faces were different, but the rhythm was the same. They called themselves 5-0, and by the time most of the city woke up, their operation was already underway. The resurrection of Manchester's vehicle theft network didn't happen overnight. It was gradual, methodical, and informed by the mistakes of the previous generation. Where Asif Hussein's crew had relied on a centralized operation, the new network was decentralized. Instead of one main facility, they operated multiple smaller units scattered across Greater Manchester. This made surveillance harder and reduced the risk of a single raid shutting down the entire operation. At the center of this new network was Asif Matadar, a name that had appeared on the fringes of earlier organized vehicle theft inquiries. He wasn't connected directly to Hussein's jailed crew, but investigators noticed shared contacts, overlapping phone records, similar suppliers, and the same freight agents once used by the company. Matadar's network was built on distribution rather than hierarchy. Each man ran his own yard, feeding parts and cars into a wider chain. Shawaz Rahman operated one of the busiest chop shops in Oldham, a unit that stripped vehicles within hours of being stolen. Rahman was already on police radar for coercive control and violence offenses, with investigations running parallel to the theft case. Detectives later linked his operation to at least 30 stolen cars. Imran Taj managed logistics, moving stripped components to exporters and scrap buyers. Zishan Ali and Muhammad Imran handled the mechanical side, removing trackers, altering chassis numbers, and packaging engines for shipment. Their yards ran late into the night, echoing the same industrial precision seen years earlier under Hussein's group. Adam Elwood, one of the younger members, had a reputation for risk. While others stayed within the theft trade, he began branching out, investing profits into drug supply and using stolen vehicles as cover for transport and getaway runs. His name would appear repeatedly in later Greater Manchester police briefings as a key crossover between vehicle crime and the city's street-level drug networks. Overseeing finances and coordination was James Hopkinson, whose connections stretched across several auto salvage companies in Greater Manchester. It was his accounts that linked the group's financial trail to older laundering patterns from the company. Together, these 7 men rebuilt the structure that once dominated Manchester's stolen car economy, not as a single warehouse, but as a network of yards. And they did it with one key advantage. They had learned from Hussein's mistakes. They used burner phones more carefully. They rotated premises more frequently, and they avoided leaving digital trails that could be easily traced. But they underestimated one thing. The police had learned too. By mid-2024, months of covert surveillance followed, with unmarked teams monitoring industrial estates from dawn until well after midnight. Drones became one of the unit's most valuable tools, quietly hovering above suspected yards, capturing images of cars entering late at night and leaving stripped bare by morning. Investigators also deployed discreet tracker beacons on vehicles known to be at risk. High-value SUVs and saloons flagged by insurers and victims alike. Within hours of being stolen, many of those cars were tracked directly to the same set of yards police had under watch. Inside, the clues were unmistakable. Forensic teams later confirmed that the specialist dismantling tools recovered during searches, hydraulic spreaders, electronic reprogrammers, and VIN grinders, matched the make and wear patterns of those seized from the original company raids years earlier. Financial investigators traced money flowing from small garages in Manchester to repeat buyers in the UAE and Eastern Europe, mirroring the same export routes used by Hussein's network. Payments were disguised through legitimate-sounding accounts. Auto parts, performance upgrades, logistics fees. But when customs agencies in those regions ran serial number checks, the trail led back to stolen UK vehicles. Recognizing the scope, Greater Manchester Police worked with the National Vehicle Crime Intelligence Service and Border Force to monitor outgoing freight containers. Intelligence sharing extended to ports in Essex, Merseyside, and the Midlands. It was there that customs data confirmed the worst. Export bookings had resumed, with vehicle components listed under false declarations for used mechanical parts. The confirmation was all detectives needed. This time, police wanted to end it before another generation of stolen cars disappeared overseas. At dawn on a cold morning in October 2024, Greater Manchester Police launched their most coordinated vehicle crime operation in years. After months of intelligence work under Operation Avis, 8 simultaneous warrants were executed across Oldham, Stockport, Radcliffe, and Wigan. Just after 5 in the morning, officers moved in. Tactical teams breached the first sites under warrant, backed by roads policing and the regional organized crime unit. Inside, they found the evidence they had been building toward for months. Rows of half-dismantled luxury cars, stripped dashboards, boxed engines, cloned electronic modules stacked neatly on pallets, More than 90 vehicles or stripped assemblies were recovered across all locations. Evidence logs showed engines and transmissions wrapped in plastic, marked with destination initials for Turkey, the UAE, and West Africa. Nearby, computers stored shipping drafts listing parts. As forensic teams catalogued parts and chassis fragments, investigators seized phones, paperwork, and laptops containing the digital skeleton of the network. By midday, arrests were underway across Greater Manchester. Asif Matadar, Shawaz Rahman, Imran Taj, Zishan Ali, Adam Elwood, Muhammad Imran, and James Hopkinson were all detained under conspiracy to steal, handle, and export stolen goods. Each was taken to specialist custody suites for questioning as teams continued searches through the night. What began as a whisper of old habits had become a full-scale takedown. The 5-0 network, the second generation of Manchester's car theft empire, had been caught in the act just as their containers were being prepared for export. In October 2024, the case returned to Manchester Crown Court, where months of evidence, surveillance footage, and financial tracing were finally laid out in full. The defendants sat side by side as prosecutors described the overwhelming evidence. Judge Neil Usher told the court that what had been uncovered was a highly professional and organized enterprise, one that blended fraud, export crime, and precision planning. When sentencing began, the scale of individual involvement was made clear. Adam Elwood received 6 years, reflecting his additional convictions for drug offenses and dangerous driving. Shawaz Rahman was jailed for 4 years and 9 months. Imran Taj received 4 years. Zishan Ali was sentenced to 3 years and 9 months. Asif Matadar was given 3 years and 6 months. Muhammad Imran received 3 years, and James Hopkinson was handed 8 months suspended for 18 months. Together, the group faced a combined total of 25 years imprisonment. The sentences marked the end of a case that had taken years to build and months to prosecute. But the story didn't end there. The Manchester Airport valet scam and the 5-0 network exposed vulnerabilities that went far beyond vehicle theft. They revealed how legitimate business structures could be exploited to mask systematic criminality, how digital platforms allowed fake companies to operate with minimal oversight, and how economic disruption, particularly during the pandemic, created opportunities for organized crime to rebuild networks that had been dismantled years earlier. The bounce-back loans that funded some of these operations were meant to support struggling businesses. Instead, they became capital for criminal enterprises. The case also highlighted the importance of inter-agency cooperation. Greater Manchester Police, the National Vehicle Crime Intelligence Service, Border Force, and customs agencies in multiple countries had to work together to dismantle the network. Without that coordination, the 5-0 crew might still be operating today. For the victims, the impact was profound. Many described not just the financial loss, but the psychological toll of knowing their trust had been exploited. Families who had saved for holidays returned to find their cars gone, their insurance claims delayed, their lives disrupted. Some victims never recovered the full value of their vehicles, even after settlements. And beyond the individual losses, there was a broader economic impact. The theft of high-value vehicles inflated insurance premiums across the region. Legitimate valet companies saw their reputations damaged by association, and the costs of investigation, prosecution, and asset recovery ran into millions of pounds. But perhaps the most significant legacy of the case is what it revealed about the resilience of organized crime. The Manchester networks didn't disappear after the first convictions. They adapted, they learned, they rebuilt. And they did so with a level of sophistication that challenged traditional investigative methods. The use of decentralized operations, encrypted communications, and international export routes showed a criminal ecosystem that was evolving as fast as the technology designed to stop it. Investigators now face a fundamental question. How do you dismantle a network that can regenerate itself? The answer, according to Greater Manchester Police, lies in sustained pressure. Not just arrests and prosecutions, but ongoing surveillance of high-risk areas, partnerships with international law enforcement, and financial monitoring of businesses that operate in the automotive sector. In the months following the 5-0 convictions, police continued to monitor industrial estates across Oldham, Chadderton and Radcliffe. They worked with landlords to identify suspicious tenancies. They shared intelligence with border agencies to flag outgoing shipments. And they maintained public awareness campaigns, warning travellers to use only verified parking services and to report suspicious activity. The Manchester Airport valet scam and the 5-0 network are not unique. Similar operations have been uncovered in Birmingham, London and Liverpool. Vehicle theft remains one of the most profitable areas of organised crime in the United Kingdom, with an estimated economic impact exceeding £500 million annually. And as vehicles become more technologically advanced, the methods used to steal and dismantle them become more sophisticated too. The case also raised questions about regulation. How were fake valet companies able to operate so freely online? Why were export declarations not subject to more rigorous checks? And how did businesses receiving government support during the pandemic avoid scrutiny when their activities clearly suggested criminal involvement? These are questions that extend beyond policing and into policy. The government has since announced plans to tighten regulations around online valet services and to increase funding for vehicle crime intelligence units. But whether those measures will be enough remains to be seen. For now, the Manchester Airport valet scam and the 5-0 network stand as a reminder of how organised crime adapts, evolves, and exploits weaknesses in systems designed to protect the public. The men convicted in both operations are serving their sentences in prisons across the United Kingdom. Their yards have been dismantled, their accounts have been seized, and the vehicles they stole have, in many cases, been returned to their owners or compensated through insurance. But the infrastructure that allowed them to operate, the industrial estates, the freight routes, the international buyers, remains in place. And as long as there is demand for stolen vehicles and parts, there will be networks ready to supply them. The story of the Manchester Airport valet scam and the 5-0 network is not just a story of crime and punishment. It is a story of systems, vulnerabilities, and the constant struggle between those who seek to exploit them and those who work to protect them. It is a story that continues even now in garages and industrial estates across the United Kingdom. And it is a story that reminds us that the line between legitimate business and organised crime is often thinner than we imagine.